If you visit any ancient temple in Bharat, which is at the very least 300 to 400 years old or even older, there is a fair amount of chance that you would come across these kinds of vandalized idols. And also it's a well-known fact that because of Islamic invasions, a significant amount of art and architecture of Bharat has been vandalized because of the contentious views and beliefs of the invaders on idol worship. This short doc film is aimed at bringing a holistic understanding of the past, present and the future as far as these contentions go. We tried our best to bring forward the story in the most respectable format without denigrating any community or religion. And I request you strictly to refrain any kind of derogatory comments and to uphold the decorum of this channel. Let's get started. Following our traditional template, let's cut this doc film into 3 chapters for ease of understanding. The first chapter, let's try and understand the history of contentions on idol worship. Why at all idol worship has been contentious? Back in history, what are its origins? Moving to the second chapter, discovering the universal truth. Forget about idol worship for a minute. Why do people worship at all? There is one truth that runs around the world as an answer to the question that why do people worship at all in first place? Let's see that in chapter number 2. Third and the last chapter is on the Bhartiya philosophy on idol worship. And this chapter is very crucial and acts as a foundation. If one wants to understand the grandeur of Bhartiya Temples, then we should understand the Bhartiya philosophy behind that in first place. And that's what we're going to see in chapter number 3. And that is the sum and substance of this doc film. And before we move forward, there is one very important reason, rather a pertinent one as well, as to why I chose to make a doc film on this topic. And I'll reveal that as we move forward. So let's get started. In the first chapter, let's try and understand the history of contentions on idol worship. Around the world in the history of humankind, worshipping a deity in the form of an idol is nothing special at all. Every culture in every part of the world had their own manifestations, cultures, ways and means of worshipping different kinds of deities. Strictly speaking, this topic is not worth a topic where we can learn something new. This is a very bland topic in my opinion because every culture has their own ways and means of worshipping, and why should anyone have a problem with other culture in first place? But nonetheless, let's try and understand where it started. Some 3,500 years back in time, that's around 1500 BC and thereabouts, a group of people called Israelites, led by a man called Moses, started their journey from Egypt towards the east in search of a new homeland. And the story of this community called Israelites is what later developed into a religion called as Judaism, and from it originated Christianity and Islam as well. All three put together are called as Abrahamic religions, as we all know. To put a very long story in simple terms, Moses is revered as a prophet in all three Abrahamic religions, and especially in Judaism. He is revered as the first prophet. And Moses wanted his community, the Israelites, who were under slavery back then in Egypt, and lead them to a new homeland under the revelation and the instructions from a God called Jehovah. Moses manages to lead his entire community out of Egypt in search of a new homeland, and in their journey, he strictly instructs the entire Israelite community to worship no one other than Jehovah. However, during the journey, the Israelite community makes an idol of a golden calf or a golden cow or a bull, whatever it could be, a bovine basically. And then they start worshipping this golden bovine. And that is when Moses strictly implements punishment for those who resorted this. And from then on, idol worship has been absolutely forbidden in Judaism. And the same ideology was inherited into Christianity and Islam as well. And this golden calf episode from the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament of Bible is essentially the origins of why the Abrahamic religions were against idol worship. Idol worship is considered as an unpardonable offense in all these three religions. Now, good for them, and I have no interest in criticizing any of these, as you might know. But the problem is, when this ideology was imposed on Bharat, or for that matter, rest of many parts of the world where colonization happened, like the pagan religions and cultures in Europe, or in Africa, or in the Americas or Australia. The local religions and cultures, the art and architecture suffered a lot. And a good live example is hundreds of temples across Bharat, which are vandalized. One of the prime reasons is the aversion towards idol worship from this ideology is fundamentally the root cause. And let me also make my position very clear. We are no way disrespecting or disregarding any religion or ideology. If idol worship is forbidden in a religion or a group of religions, good for them. But vandalism can never be justified. And with all due respect towards every religion and culture, we are trying to make this doc film to bring a clear-cut awareness about the history and the present and future as well. So that is a brief history of why idol worship was very contentious. And also by extension, idol worship in this context doesn't limit only to a physical manifestation of a deity, like a sculpture. It goes beyond that, like worshipping a tree or a mountain or a river, worshipping parts of nature. It is also forbidden and is equally considered as an unpardonable offense from these ideologies. So now let's get to the second chapter, discovering the universal truth. It's all about a very pertinent question that we all should ask ourselves. In Bharat, we have a diverse set of cultures where people worship trees, rivers, mountains, different kinds of animals, needless to mention, cow, different deities and different kinds of manifestations, elements of nature, and the list goes on and on. Let's try to take a step back and ask one simple and a basic question. Why do people worship at all? And for the next couple of minutes, let's try to probe into this question, and while doing so, don't try to act secular. Because if you try to act secular, then your ability to think will drastically drop. Holding to our question of why do people worship at all in first place, let's try to expand our premise out of Bharat. If we turn back the pages of the history of humankind, be it the pagan traditions in Europe or the Native American cultures or the Africans or the Australian Aboriginals, this concept of worshipping exists throughout the history of humankind. So let us expand the premise of our question. Not just in Bharat, but around the world, people worship different kinds of things like rivers, mountains, animals, deities from the respective cultures, and so on. Why so? For thousands of years around the world, people have been continuously in search of better food, better shelter, and better clothing, and a better lifestyle. So all this fits very logically. But then, one pattern of worshipping, what explains that? And if one tries to observe with that question and a perspective, this 5-step pattern would possibly emerge as an answer. And these are my observations that I would like to share with you. Let us take sun. Sun is a very common deity in many cultures around the world. So now let us try to retro-simulate the thought process of our ancestors. And I'm not referring only to Bharat, but around the world. Why is that people worshipped sun? So let's take a practical example. So here we go. The first and basic state of mind of early men and women would be of ignorance. I don't know what sun. Other than the fact that it's a shiny object up there in the sky that is giving me light and heat, I don't know what is sun. That's where we all would have started. Slowly over the time, the early men and women, they experienced sun. When they went on a quest for food and when the sun shines bright, there is a good amount of chance that the nature around us would blossom, and there you get fruits and vegetables and all and whatnot. And on the flip side, if the sun doesn't shine because of rainy season or during the winter, the availability of food drops. Now all this is from one part of the climate of the world. In other parts of the world, summers you might not get food and winter you might get food. Bottom line is, I experience the fact that sun is the source of my food on earth. And this experience, which evolves from ignorance, is the second state of mind. Up next is the third state of mind that evolves from experience, which is gratitude. Sun might be a shiny little thing up there in the sky, but depending on the fact that whether sun is shining or not, it is directly impacting whether I'll be able to get food for my stomach or not, what kind of clothing I would need, what kind of shelter that I need to build. I realize that sun has a straight and direct impact on all these aspects of my survival and life. So I wait with a sense of gratitude for it to shine or not shine, depending on which part of the world I'm living in, for my existence, for me to survive and for me to live. I wait with gratitude for this little shiny object to shine or not shine. And when the gratitude intensifies, that evolves into another state of mind, that is respect. I realize the fact that I am alive only because of sun. And when this state of mind, the fourth state of respect, further intensifies, that evolves into an emotion called devotion. I prostrate to sun, I worship sun, because me and everything around me is existing only because of sun. When I realize this fact with a deep sense of emotion, that's when I start worshipping sun and I get devoted to sun. Now this 5-step evolution from ignorance to experience to gratitude to respect and finally to devotion. This is why possibly and logically around the world people worship different kinds of entities. Tribal people in the forest worship mountains, rivers and trees. A fisherman might worship a river or sea. A carpenter might worship his tools. Everywhere, the common pattern is when that object of worship or the entity of worship is deeply connected to the life and livelihood of a person, that is when people worship that specific entity. Let us take a more relatable example. When we were just born, we are in a state of ignorance. We don't know anyone, we don't know anything other than our mother and of course father as well. That is the first state of mind, ignorance. And then slowly evolves experience. As we grow and we get toys and gifts and clothes and presents from our parents, we experience all that sweetness. And as we further grow, get into teenage and becomes more matured, we feel that gratitude towards our parents. And once we get into our own job or business and when we start earning and paying our own bills, then we might realize the hardships of our parents in raising us. And then we are going to develop a real and deep respect for our parents. And finally, when that emotion intensifies and when you really miss your parents, that is when you get devoted to your parents. So all in all, this 5-step evolution of ignorance, experience, gratitude, respect and devotion, this pattern perfectly fits around the world in whichever culture you take, in whichever entity or an object that you are devoted towards. This is possibly the logic and reason behind this question of why people worship. And if we take the Bharatiya context of worshipping sun as Surya Bhagavan, where sun is deified as Surya Bhagavan and there are great and grand temples dedicated for Surya Bhagavan and people worship him. And if one takes a closer and deeper look into the philosophy of worshipping Surya Bhagavan, astonishing details will be revealed. Surya Bhagavan has been the central deity in development of mathematics in Bharat. And not just in the field of science, in terms of spirituality as well. Every dawn and dusk, as part of Sandhya Vandanam, along with Gayatri Mantram, people worship Surya Bhagavan, both spiritually and scientifically. The worship of Surya Bhagavan in the history of Bharat is very wide, deep and complex. And the temples dedicated for Surya Bhagavan, for instance, the Martand Sun Temple of Kashmir, what you're seeing here, is vandalized. Now what logic or reason explains vandalizing such great and grand structures, which are historically, spiritually and scientifically deeply rooted into the culture of Bharat? What explains the logic and reason behind this vandalism? Think about it. So that's about this chapter on the question of why do people worship, and because of this 5-step evolution. And this is the universal truth. But this is just half of the truth, one side of the coin. But the other side of the coin shows another pattern as well. Ignorance, experience, insecurity, fear and superstition. People can worship sun because of superstition as well. Now the reason for why people worship could be either because of devotion or because of superstition. Now how are you going to figure out whether it is devotion or superstition? It's pretty simple. If experience leads to insecurity, fear, these aspects, then that essentially ends up in superstition. But the experience, if it nurtures gratitude and respect, then that leads to devotion. Anyways, summing it up all, this is the universal truth and the pattern as to why people worship. Now let's move to the elephant in the room, the idol worship. That brings us to the third and last chapter, the Bharatiya philosophy on idol worship. Now let us try to take the same 5-step evolution towards devotion to the next level. If sun is the prime cause for my existence and I worship sun, That perfectly fits in the logic. Then what is the reason for existence of sun itself? Because it's a chain reaction. Because of something, sun exists, and because of sun, I exist. So the sense of devotion goes up high into the chain, up until the primordial cause for the existence of this nature and cosmos. And in Bharatiya context, or in the Bharatiya philosophy, that primordial cause is revered as Brahman. In Bharatiya philosophy, Brahman holds the highest spiritual position and is the epitome of nature, cosmos, and everything in it. The essence of Bharatiya philosophy is all about discovering, understanding, experiencing, and finally dissolving in Brahman. And as a quick side note, the moment you hear this word Brahman, a lot of negative connotations will definitely kick in. Unfortunately, many people denigrated it and abused it from both sides of the table. All that might be for another day. But for today, let's continue understanding Brahman. The essence of all the four Vedas and the tons of many other scriptures is all about understanding Brahman. So let's pick up one relatively simpler scripture called Kena Upanishad. Kena Upanishad ascribes to Samavedam, and the word Kena means question. Kena Upanishad is all about a dialectical conversation between a guru and a Sishya. Sishya asks the guru, what is the cause for the existence of this nature and cosmos? Where it all started. Pretty interesting and deep conversation. And this is how it goes. Sishya asks his guru, what is the cause for mind to think? What is the cause for life to thrive? What is the cause for people's ability to speak? How does intelligence command the eye and the ear to function the way they are? So basically the essence of the question is, what is that one primordial cause for this entire nature to function the way it is? The guru replies, the answer to your question, the primordial cause for our existence, that cause cannot be seen by a human eye. The speech cannot describe it. The mind cannot understand it. We don't know how to instruct anyone about it. It is distinct from the known and above unknown. That primordial cause is revered as Brahman. And the Guru continues, what one cannot think with mind, but by which the mind is made to think. What speech does not enlighten, but what enlightens speech. What cannot be seen by the human eye, but by which the eyes are being able to see. That cause is called as Brahman. If we try to articulate this in simpler terms, this entire universe and everything in it is a complex web of cause and effect. Now for every effect, there will be a cause. And if one tries to continuously question backwards to trace the cause for every effect, then finally the answer or the final cause would be Brahman. And if all this sounds very complicated and complex and difficult to understand, clumsy and whatnot, then you are not alone. Krishna in Bhagavad Gita himself says that this aspect of understanding Brahman for normal people like you and me is extremely difficult. And this is what he says. Kleshodikatarastesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hi gatir dukkham dehavadbhir avapyate. The translation is, for the human beings with materialistic perspective, understanding and worshipping the Brahman in an unmanifested form is very difficult. And such kind of a worship of Brahman in unmanifested form is called as Nirakaropasana, which is very difficult. That is the reason why Brahman is understood and worshipped in two different forms. One is Sakara and the other one is Nirakara. Sakaropasana is where we have the Murti Puja or the idol worship, which is loosely translated into English. And this aspect of idol worship originated with the cause to understand Brahman. In Nirakaropasana, these idols or the murtis or the puja, all these rituals will not be there. It's totally a different kind of practice. Now comes the reason why I chose to make a doc film on this subject. Now the people who are motivated to have this religious conversion business, they're trying to twist and tweak this Nirakaropasana into a fact that, see, Sanatana Dharma itself does not promote idol worship or Murti Puja, and it is very offensive. They're trying to push their point, their agenda, their business of conversions by misleading people and misquoting the scriptures of Sanatana Dharma and to pull people into their religious business, whatever it is. Fact of the matter is, Sakaropasana is meant for everybody, and this is where you have the physical manifestations of the divine entities. And Nirakaropasana is relatively very difficult process of understanding Brahman. And in the practice of Nirakara Upasana, there are no murtis or idols or any physical manifestations of Brahman. One propagating his or her own religion is nothing wrong. It's completely constitutional, legal, moral, ethical and whatnot. But the problem starts when one starts to denigrate another religion with a malicious intention to pull people towards one's own religion. And we have ample of such religious salespeople all around us. And they try to twist and tweak, saying that the idol worship is not even mentioned in Vedas also. God knows if they even know the spelling of the Vedas. But they still try to twist and tweak our scriptures with a malicious intention to push their religious agenda. Yajurvedam, Adharvana Vedam, Agama Shastram, Shilpa Shastram, all these scriptures and many more very clearly articulate what kind of murti puja should be done. What should be the structure and shape and form of all these murtis or idols? I'm not even getting into the spiritual aspects of it. Prana Pratishta. This itself is an incredibly deep subject when it comes to murti puja. To keep things simple so that all of us can understand, I'm refraining from all that. But the point is, there are many scriptures which foundationally explain how idol worship should be done and for what reason and purpose in Sanatana Dharma. So don't get misled by such kind of religious salespeople. Use your common sense, logical thinking ability, and if you have interest, read the scriptures and then form an informed opinion for yourself. Before closing this documentary, let me quote a very interesting example. What you're seeing here is a Shivalingam from a temple called as Gudimallam in Tirupati, Andhra Pradesh. Here the Shivalingam is carved mostly with the features of Shiva as explained in Sri Rudram as part of Yajurvedam. This temple is under the control of Archaeological Survey of India, and this Shivalingam is the oldest datable Shivalingam across India. Mind the word, datable. There are two reasons why I'm bringing this example of the Shivalingam. Number one, do not get misled by the false narratives that idol worship or murti puja is not mentioned in Vedas, which is being maliciously propagated by these religious salespeople. This Shivalingam is more than 2300 years old and it physically depicts the features of Shiva as per Yajurvedam. Reason number two, this Shivalingam challenges our very understanding of the word Brahman. As I said, this word is denigrated and abused by both sides of the table. But if you observe, in this manifestation, Shiva does not have a Yajnopavitam or Janyu, which is revered as a sacred thread across the body. And you absolutely cannot find any divine entity, a divine masculine entity, without Yajnopavitam in across Sanatana Dharma. Probably this is the only Shivalingam which does not have a Yajnopavitam, but still carved according to the features of Yajurvedam. This Shivalingam and the temple fundamentally challenges our very understanding of both the spiritual and the social aspects that we have been taught. So the bottom line is very simple. Don't go by the narratives. Apply your logic, reason, thinking ability and all that stuff for which we are all blessed with, and then make your informed opinions on be it idol worship or this left liberal lingo called Brahminical patriarchy and whatnot. So that's a quick outlook on the idol worship, the historical context, the contentions, the philosophy and everything about it in a nutshell. In my last couple of years of research, if I really have to summarize what I understood and learned in one line in this context of worshipping, here it is. While in most parts of the world, people were fighting and killing each other for this question on who is God, in Bharat, there were discussions and discourses on what is God. If you don't know what is God, then how can you ever say who is God? And here is a very interesting thing. In Bharat, as part of these discussions and debates, and out of this very conducive spiritual atmosphere, there emerged ideologies where you don't even need God. There is no need for God. Such kind of ideologies also thrived out of Bharat. Vandalizing temples and idols in the name of religion only shows, or rather highlights, the incapabilities and insecurities of those ideologies. The pluralistic, inclusive, conducive and spiritual culture and heritage of Bharat should always be preserved for the betterment of humanity. And on those lines, here are my 2 cents, and as always, thanks for watching.